Hey guys, life has been stressful as of late. That's why I missed the video on Monday, unfortunately. And quite honestly, the only bright spots have been the daughter of one of my best friends coming by and teaching me about skincare and makeup stuff and all that, which has actually gone really well. I picked up some different things from Ulta and they are amazing. Like, yes, these prices are freaking insane, but the staying power of the makeup makes it worth it. I got two different lipsticks, I got two different liquid eyeshadows, and a bunch of other things the other time that we were there. But yeah, these things, like, I've spent, what did I spend? I spent like $130, no, 140 among the 3 times that I've been there recently, which is more than I've spent on makeup literally since 2019. But yeah, it was definitely worth it to get the stuff. So yeah, aside from the crap storm that is my personal life right now, I want to talk about something that 2 friends and my dad have brought to my attention in the past couple of days. Apparently, Paul McCartney is matching with an AI program that will replicate John Lennon's voice, and he wants to release a new Beatles song with this technology. Now, I will admit I have not read the article yet. I do intend to, but I wanted to get this video out so that something came out on Wednesday, and I figured, you know what, let me just give my initial thoughts on just seeing the title of this article, and then I'll read the article, I'll see if my opinion changes. But I'm going to tell you just right off the bat, I hate the idea of that. So, I was about 12 years old when when at least the second anthology came out. I think the first one officially premiered when I was in 6th grade, and then the third one premiered when I was in 8th, something like that. But I remember being about 12 years old and in middle school when at least the second anthology was coming out, and TGIF had the whole thing where instead of playing the regular theme song for the TV shows like Family Matters, Step by Step, whatever else was on TGIF in 1995, they had Beatles songs playing for the theme songs instead. Which, looking back on it now, that was freaking awesome. But back then, I wouldn't get into the Beatles for almost another 2 years, at least a year and a half. And I couldn't care less about this old band releasing new songs. And, I didn't care. And I look back on myself at that period and can't help cringing because I had no idea what I was talking about. I had no idea how special of a thing it was that these 2 demos that John had were given, were handed over, put in the hands of Paul, George, and Ringo to be able to complete and release as 2 new Beatles songs. And, I mean, there's been a whole bunch of talk of like, well, the Beatles have kids, why doesn't Julian replace John and play with them? And now that George is gone, ever since 2001, it's like, well, what about Julian and Danny? Their sons, they could come in, they could play as the 2 of them, because, Julian definitely is musical, and I think Danny Harrison is. But at the same time, it's like, why put that on the children of the Beatles, especially Julian, who had such a tumultuous relationship with John? Because John, he is my favorite Beatle, but let's face it, if you know anything about his personal life, he largely sucked as a person. He was a sexist, misogynistic, hypocritical, abusive jackass for a good deal of his life. He cheated on Cynthia who knows how many times. He cheated on Cynthia with Yoko, which, was finally the main catalyst for Cynthia saying, you know what, enough, and them divorcing. And he basically just ignored Julian for a good deal of Julian's life. And yes, John had a lot of trauma and, horrible situations in his own life. He was someone who was abandoned by his own mother at the age of 4 or 5. And, John's mom brought him to her sister to raise John. And it was just, he did not have good bio parent role models. I do think that his aunt was a good parental role model, at least from everything that I've read. But, history repeated itself because John's mom started coming back into John's life when John was a teenager. And, they started getting along. They may have had a more friendly relationship than a parental and son one. But then, I believe was when John was 17. Yeah, when he was 17. Because it was 1958 and John hadn't reached his 18th birthday. But anyway, when John was 17, that was when his mom was killed in a car accident. And, she was permanently taken away from him. The same thing happened to Julian. John basically abandoned him when he was about 4 or 5 years old, in the late 60s, because that was when John and Cynthia got a divorce and John got together with Yoko and basically, considered Yoko his one true love and everything. And I like Yoko, everything that I've heard about her and the fact that, she basically stood up to John. In the late 70s, John has the whole Lost Weekend thing where he and Yoko were separated for about a year and a half. And, it was because Yoko basically kicked him out and said, straighten yourself out. But, anyway, though, so John did, he did straighten himself out. He and Yoko had Sean. And John came back into Julian's life. They started actually having at least something of a friendly relationship and everything like that. And then I believe Julian was 18 because he was born. No, I'm wrong. He was born in 63. So yeah, Julian was 17 when John was killed in December of 1980. So interesting little history repeating itself there. I have completely gone off on a tangent. But anyway, I didn't realize until I got into the Beatles why Free as a Bird and Real Love being released in the mid-90s, along with the rest of everything that is on the anthologies of all the different studio cuts and, mistake tracks and things like that, were released. I didn't know why it was such a monumental and important thing. And just seeing these headlines of, Paul will release a new Beatles track with John Lennon's voice replicated by an AI track, it just, for me, it takes away the specialness of something like Free as a Bird and Real Love being released. Because those were actual demos that John had recorded but never fully polished and never put out to the public. And, well, except for Real Love. There is a demo version of Real Love on the Imagine soundtrack. But still, it is still just a demo. And the fact that Paul, George, and Ringo had these things put in their hands, and Paul said back then in interviews that them being back in the studio again, it felt like John had just left for the weekend, and before he did, he said, hey, I've got these 2 songs, you know what, I trust you guys to finish them. And an AI track replicating John's voice for some new song that potentially Paul would be the one writing just feels overly artificial to me. it feels like the kind of thing that just it would lose something, you know, instead of being authentically theirs, you know, the four of theirs. And I do wonder, you know, how can you call it a Beatle? Like John not being there, John not being alive anymore, but giving this demo, and you know the other three finishing it is one thing. Like that, those Real Love and Free as a Bird actually feel like Beatles songs. But with John and George gone, only Paul and Ringo here, and Paul doing this thing where it's going to be an AI generated voice of John's. How can it feel anything but artificial? So anyway, I will see if I can come back for Friday's video after I've read the article, and I will give you my opinion after I've done that. I will see you guys. Thanks for listening to my entire rant, and I will see you on Friday.